Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. This is a special CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Thank you so much for joining us. President Trump's theme in his address to Congress, renewing the American spirit. It's a new tone, but what's the reaction tonight on Capitol Hill and really around the country? What are Americans thinking about this? Let's get right to CNN's Jim Acosta, Gloria Borger, and David Chalian. Also historian Jon Meacham, author of Destiny and Power. Thank you so much for joining us here for CNN Tonight or CNN This Morning, depending on which part of the country you're in. Gloria, I'm going to start with you. President Trump just gave the most important speech since his inauguration. Let's take a bit of it, a listen to it.
The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us. We just need the courage to share the dreams that fill our hearts, the bravery to express the hopes that stir our souls, and the confidence to turn those hopes and those dreams into action. From now on, America will be empowered by our aspirations, not burdened by our fears, inspired by the future, not bound by failures of the past, and guided by a vision, not blinded by our doubts. I am asking all citizens to embrace this renewal of the American spirit.
So, Gloria, how did he do?
Well, I would have to say that this was the most presidential speech that I have ever heard Donald Trump give. And I think that there are Republicans, many of whom I've been texting with during the evening, who were relieved to hear the president sound this way. There was a lot of trepidation going into this speech because he had never been in this environment before. And you know how the president gets his energy off of his rallies and his crowds, and he freelances, and sometimes he says things that he shouldn't. And this is a very different kind of audience. And what you heard from Donald Trump tonight was a speech that was unconventional at times in its ideas, and sometimes not, but was delivered in a way that we really haven't heard before. And I think that there were many hands in writing this speech in the White House, and they wanted to make sure that it was a different tone in a joint session to Congress. And I think it was. On the substance, I'd have to say, though, Don, that it can be a little bit confusing. I don't think Republicans walked out of there understanding what his health care proposal is actually going to be, or what he is actually going to propose on immigration. And so I think there are a lot of open issues here, but tonally, I think there is a great sense of relief among Republicans, and I would probably say in the country.
Yeah, there's a lot to dissect in what you said. Now, I'll get to that in a moment, but I just want to get everyone in here. I want to go to the White House and get Jim Acosta. Jim, what are you hearing tonight from the White House? What are your sources telling you? Do they feel good?
They feel very good, Don. I think we saw teleprompter Trump tonight, not Twitter Trump, so we'll have to see which side of the president wins out moving forward here. But you're hearing terms like grand slam, he crushed it, those sorts of reviews from White House officials. That goes without saying. You're going to hear that from inside the White House. But I have heard from at least one senior congressional Republican source tonight who said that the president was presidential. Now, he is being graded somewhat on a curve because, you know, in the weeks leading up to this speech, he had a travel ban that was frozen in court. He was talking about unfounded claims of voter fraud and his inauguration crowd sizes and so on. And so this is a moment that has certainly pulled his presidency out of the fire somewhat. But Gloria is absolutely right. President Trump moderated his positions on health care reform, on immigration, on a whole host of issues. And I think that is going to serve him well going forward. And they're feeling so good about this over at the White House tonight, Don, that we are hearing that the president is no longer expected to sign this revised travel ban executive order tomorrow, that is now being pushed back again because they want to let these good vibrations keep going.
That he doesn't want to step on his message. David,
That's right.
You have an instant poll to share. What are you finding?
Yeah, so we should just remind our viewers that this is an instant poll of speech watchers, not a poll of the country overall. And speech watchers tend to be a little bit leaning in the party of the president giving this kind of speech. We've seen that with both Democrats and Republicans. So that being said, with a little bit of favorable audience, nonetheless, a really good night for Donald Trump, as everyone's been saying. Take a look here. 57% of speech watchers say they had a very positive reaction to his speech, 21% somewhat positive, 21% negative. Then we asked, what Trump's policies, will they move the country in the right direction or the wrong direction? 69%, Don, say that the policies he talked about tonight, 69% of speech watchers say it's going to move the country in the right direction, 26% wrong direction. And take a look at that 69%. He grew with the speech. If you look, prior to the speech, 58% of speech watchers said that his policies would move the country in the right direction. After watching the speech, that went up 11 points to 69%. And then we asked if the speech made people who were watching it more optimistic. And again, really high marks here for the president. 69% of speech watchers say they felt more optimistic after watching the speech, 28% more pessimistic.
And we'll go through these numbers as well because there's also a comparison to his predecessors, but I want to get Jon Meacham in. John, speak to the pomp and circumstance of all of this. The president speaking to Congress and the American people, walking into that room and all of that applause. How significant was that for the president at this time in his presidency? It's early on.
I think we shouldn't be surprised, perhaps, that this venue turned out to be a congenial one for him, because it's a little bit like a rally, at least to his left, only physically. So he could get off, he could ride off that energy. He didn't mind scowling at the Democrats. And so in a way, this was sort of rally Trump meets President Trump. Presidents go to that chamber to declare war, to celebrate peace, and to hit the reset button. And I think that's what President Trump did tonight. My hope is that he was listening to what he said. He was big-hearted. The rhetoric that I think many on the left will be upset about and say, oh, it doesn't mean anything, is still rhetoric. I mean, it's still what a lot of us, I include myself, have wanted to hear from him as he's tried to, as we've hoped, he would try to unify the country to some extent. He's got that enormous base of support with Republicans, 85% or so, and many, he's not going to get many Democrats, but there's a good 10, 15% of people in the center, I think, who want to be led by someone with a more cheerful face. And I think he showed us that face. The question now is going to be, is there substance with that style?
Let's talk more substance now, Gloria, especially I think what most people were looking for, and that was about repealing and replacing Obamacare. Take a listen to the president.
Tonight, I am also calling on this Congress to repeal and replace Obamacare. With reforms that expand choice, increase access, lower costs, and at the same time provide better health care. Mandating every American to buy government-approved health insurance was never the right solution for our country. The way to make health insurance available to everyone is to lower the cost of health insurance, and that is what we are going to do.
Gloria, did you hear any specifics? Hear a workable plan?
I didn't hear a plan, and there were lots of Republicans who wanted to hear a plan. I was talking to a bunch before the speech tonight, and they would have liked some guideposts. The president wasn't going to do that. That may be because there aren't any guideposts at this particular point. And there are lots of conservatives who are worried about a proposal circulating that includes some kind of tax credits, which they view, I think rightly so, as another kind of entitlement that would start as a result of this. And they don't want that. So the president was talking about what he wants. Access to health coverage, not health coverage for all, but access to health coverage for all, and went down a long laundry list of things, including not getting rid of pre-existing conditions, et cetera. But the rubber hasn't met the road yet.
Yeah.
And Republicans are going to have a hard time agreeing with each other about what to do in terms of replacing Obamacare. So that problem was not solved tonight.
Jim Acosta, you know, the president began his address by speaking about Black History Month and about the wave of threats hitting Jewish community centers and other Jewish sites. Let's listen.
Tonight, as we mark the conclusion of our celebration of Black History Month, we are reminded of our nation's path toward civil rights and the work that still remains to be done. Recent threats targeting Jewish community centers and vandalism of Jewish cemeteries, as well as last week's shooting in Kansas City, remind us that while we may be a nation divided on policies, we are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its very ugly forms.
So Jim Acosta, he and his administration, they've scoffed at the criticism, but and say that, you know, they weren't under pressure. But it's obvious that they were under pressure because he hit this right in the beginning of his speech.
Absolutely, Don. And I think what we saw here tonight was a transition from the campaign phase of President Trump to the governing phase of President Trump. You hear this so often with every new administration. They just have this very difficult task of shedding that campaign mindset where they feel like they have to go back after their campaign adversaries. That's why you heard the president in the early weeks of this administration continue to go after the news media, continue to go after Hillary Clinton. He brought up President Obama just today in a Fox News interview. And I think through a process of trial and error, this White House may be coming to the conclusion, and perhaps the president is coming to the conclusion, that you can get a lot farther in this town with your agenda with a smile and not a scowl. And so I think we're just going to have to see whether or not this lasts. And I think, Don, that the best test of that is maybe check the president's Twitter feed at 6 o'clock in the morning in about 6 hours from now to see whether or not this actually takes hold. But when you hear, as Gloria said, we don't have all of the details on the president's health care plans, but he is starting to embrace the House Republican proposal. That is at least going to give Paul Ryan some comfort to talk to his members and say, listen, when you go out to these town halls and they're screaming at you, you at least have something to talk about in response to all that in terms of a replacement bill. And on immigration, you know, this is an issue that the president was just really coming under heavy criticism for, as ICE agents were going around the country and detaining people by putting out this trial balloon today that perhaps there might be a path to legal status for people who play by the rules in this country who are undocumented. That's going to go a long way to calm things down around the country and especially here in Washington.
Well, yeah, we got a lot to get to. We talked a lot about tone, but what about specifics? What about the reality checks from this speech? That's a lot to talk about. Jim Acosta, thank you very much. Everybody else, stick around. We come right back. An emotional moment from tonight's speech, the moment we saw a different President Trump. The president delivering his first address to a joint session of Congress tonight. Back with you now, Gloria Borger, David Chalian, and Jon Meacham. We had to get Jim Acosta off the White House lawn. They were going to kick him out, so we let him go. So, Gloria, let's talk about the president. He spoke about this controversial covert Yemen raid that he authorized just days into his presidency tonight, which resulted in the death of Navy SEAL William Ryan Owens. He spoke about it. Listen.
We are blessed to be joined tonight by Corinne Owens, the widow of U.S. Navy Special Operator, Senior Chief William Ryan Owens. Ryan died as he lived, a warrior and a hero, battling against terrorism and securing our nation. I just spoke to our great General Mattis just now, who reconfirmed that, and I quote, Ryan was a part of a highly successful raid that generated large amounts of vital intelligence that will lead to many more victories in the future against our enemy. Ryan's legacy is etched into eternity. Thank you. Thank you.
And then there was a long ovation, Gloria. What did you make of that moment?
Well, it was a stunning moment. I think that we were talking about earlier in the evening that these kinds of moments were first created by Ronald Reagan when he recognized a hero who, Lenny Skutnik, who jumped into the river and rescued people after a plane crash in D.C. And this was a moment that was so difficult for the widow, and it gave the president an opportunity not only to honor her husband's service, but to honor her, and also to make the point very clearly, because there's been controversy over this, to refute reports that nothing of value was gained as a result of this raid. And he made the case and basically said, don't take my word for it, take General Mattis's word for it, that there was valuable intelligence that was recovered. And we know the controversy. The father did not want to meet with the president at Dover, but clearly his widow was here tonight and probably was grateful that she was.
John, what did you think of the moment?
I agree with Gloria. It's been 35 years since this particular feature of presidential addresses came into the vernacular. And I think this is one that will be remembered in the way the Skutnik moment was back in 1982. I think it's also going to actually feed the story, I must say, given the nature of the beast, about what was the actionable intelligence that came out of this raid. And so President Trump has characteristically very much laid down his marker.
Hey, John, let me ask you, because Gloria said it's been, Reagan started this. What's the purpose of, as a historian, why do they do this? These types of moments.
It's wonderful theatrics, and I use that word in the way the Greeks did. It's showing a reality, a larger reality. We went for a long time without actually having presidents speak in the House chamber. Thomas Jefferson was a terrible public speaker, and so he bagged it. And he was a good writer, so he just sent up his State of the Union. It was actually Woodrow Wilson, and I suspect this is the first time Woodrow Wilson has been mentioned tonight, that brought this back because he wanted to be seen as the president, as the leader of the legislature. And in the early part of the 20th century. And President Reagan, with that remarkable show business instinct, and again, I don't say that to be dismissive by any means, he wanted to illustrate, he thought anecdotally. Ronald Reagan always, if you wanted to get to Reagan, one of the things you did is you either related it to an old Hollywood story or you told him a personal anecdote. And he thought that anecdotes would illustrate these principles he was talking about American exceptionalism.
Yeah, I wasn't dismissive. That was part of Reagan's appeal. I think that's, widely known, right? That's part of the reason he got elected. But David, earlier today, the president told Fox News that this mission was started before he took office, and he said the general's quote, and this is a quote from him, lost Ryan. So what do you think of, compare that to what we heard tonight?
Well, I think this was in part cleaning that up and as Gloria said, sort of responding to some of the reporting out there, directly quoting Mattis. To John's point, one has to assume that some proof of that there exists, or General Mattis would not allow himself to be directly quoted in such a matter in a high-profile address to a joint session of Congress. So, yeah, I think earlier today you referenced on that Fox interview, we heard Donald Trump talk about this in a way that didn't really sound very much like a commander-in-chief, somebody who talks about these missions much. And then tonight, he had the very, an utmost commander-in-chief moment. And obviously, it was, you can just see how fresh the pain is for the widow. And Donald Trump sort of in full in full dress in that role as commander-in-chief, able to hold this American hero up before the whole country.
And you said, but the dad did not want to meet, but the widow wanted to come and obviously have respects be paid to her and her husband tonight, David.
Yes, we saw the father was interviewed and wanted no part of President Trump or maybe politics more broadly in that very painful moment at Dover, in that solemn ceremony, that coming home. And so this clearly was a different approach from his widow.
David, John, Gloria, thank you so much. Thanks for staying up late. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks, Don.
Straight ahead, Americans are weighing in on the president's address. Did they like what they heard? We're going to take a look next.